At my father's funeral, just as they lowered the casket into the ground, my stepbrother stood up and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He left her nothing, because she's not really his." The words hit me like a slap across the face. My hands started shaking. I turned to look at him, thinking maybe he was joking. Maybe grief had twisted his sense of what was appropriate. But there was no humor in his eyes, just cold certainty. Then my uncle, Ellis, nodded. He didn't say a word. He just nodded like that statement was the final truth, like it was something everyone had agreed upon behind my back. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and the quiet hum of whispered reactions around the gravesite started to spin into one long, unbearable silence. My mother was gone. My father had just been buried, and now, somehow, in front of 100 people, I was being told I didn't belong to him. I looked around, desperate for someone, anyone to stand up for me. My father's friends were there, colleagues, family friends I'd known since I was little, but no one said anything. They just looked away or stared at the ground like I was some unwanted guest at my own father's farewell. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, "That's not true. He was my father. He raised me. He tucked me in at night. He taught me how to draw blueprints and how to plant sunflowers so the roots wouldn't drown. He gave me everything." But my voice was stuck somewhere deep in my chest. And then, just as I thought I might collapse, a woman from the back row stood up. I didn't recognize her. She looked like she had come straight from the office. Gray pencil skirt, practical heels, hair in a tight bun. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She walked forward, steady and calm, and said, "Actually, I worked with Michael for 20 years, and he asked me to hand her this when he died." She turned to me and held out a small, sealed wooden box. All eyes shifted to me. For a moment, nobody moved. The breeze stopped. The moment hung in the air like a suspended breath. I stared at the box, unsure whether to take it. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it over the murmuring crowd. Grant looked at her like she'd broken some secret agreement. My uncle clenched his jaw. The woman took one more step forward. He said to make sure she got it, if they ever tried to take everything from her. Everything inside me screamed to reach for it. Because in that moment I knew this wasn't just a box. This wasn't just some envelope or keepsake. This was something my father had left behind for me, knowing exactly what they would do. And what was inside that box changed everything. Everything I believed about my family, about myself, about why my father always looked so tired those last few years. I didn't lose him that day. I found out who he really was, and who I really am. My name is Adira Rains. I'm 28 years old, and up until my father's funeral, I thought I understood where I came from. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Richmond, Virginia, in a modest craftsman home my father helped design. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer, the kind that doesn't give you a second chance. After she was gone, it was just me and my dad, Michael Rains, architect, widower, quiet, complicated man. He was the kind of father who didn't always know what to say, but always knew how to show up. He packed my lunches with handwritten notes, even when I was old enough to roll my eyes at them. He came to every art show, even the ones where I only had one drawing taped up on the back wall. He taught me how to hold a measuring tape properly before he taught me to drive. He remarried when I was 15. Her name was Diane. She was polished, elegant, always smiling with her lips, but never her eyes. She moved in with her son, Grant, who was a few years older than me. Overnight, our quiet home turned into something colder, sharper. I don't think Diane ever said a cruel word to me directly, but I always felt like an inconvenience, a leftover from a life she didn't want to include. Grant made it worse. He treated me like I didn't belong, like I was just someone his mother was forced to tolerate. At first, I tried to connect with him. I offered to share space, to be kind, but he would make little comments when my father wasn't around, mocking my hair, my art, calling me the charity kid. I told my dad once, and he just said, "He's adjusting. Give it time." So I gave it time, years of it. I went away to college for a degree in graphic design, moved into my own apartment, and started building a life. My father and I stayed close, though. We still talked weekly. He still sent me sketches of houses he was dreaming up, and I would text him photos of murals or odd architecture that reminded me of him. He never said it outright, but I think part of him felt guilty about how things turned out at home. He would sometimes say things like, "I wish things had been simpler for you," or "I know I haven't always protected you the way I should." I didn't push him. I didn't need an apology. I just wanted him to know I was okay, that I still loved him, that I understood. But something changed in the last year of his life. He started missing our weekly calls. When we did speak, he sounded distracted, nervous, like something was weighing on him. I chalked it up to aging, stress. Maybe the firm was pressuring him to retire and he wasn't ready. Then I got the call. He'd had a heart attack. They said it was sudden, peaceful, no suffering. I didn't believe that part. He had suffered for years. He just never let anyone see it. The funeral was held 3 days later. Diane made all the arrangements. She didn't ask me about the flowers, the photos, the music. I offered to help. She smiled and said, "It's already handled." When I arrived, I noticed I wasn't listed in the printed program. My name wasn't mentioned during the speeches. When I stood to speak, Diane gave a little cough, like she was surprised I'd try to insert myself. Still, I spoke. I told them about the time my dad stayed up all night helping me finish a model of a tiny city for my 7th grade project. I told them how he used to keep a tiny notebook in his glove compartment where he wrote down places he wanted to take me. He called it Adira's Adventures. It had over 50 entries. We only got to 12. People nodded. Some smiled. But the warmth I expected wasn't there. After the service, I stood beside the casket as people paid their respects. A few gave me polite hugs. Others skipped past me entirely. Grant stood nearby, smug and stiff in a black suit that looked custom-made. He kept glancing at me like I was standing in the wrong place. I felt like an outsider at my own father's goodbye. I felt like something was being kept from me, but I didn't know what. Not yet. After the service, most of the guests moved toward the reception area behind the chapel. It was one of those multi-purpose rooms with folding chairs, punch, and finger sandwiches that no one really wanted to eat. I stayed back for a moment, watching as the casket was wheeled away. I wasn't ready to be surrounded by people who barely acknowledged me. When I finally walked into the room, I felt every eye land on me. Conversations paused. Diane was standing near the buffet table, glass of white wine in hand, talking to one of my dad's old business partners like she was hosting a gala instead of mourning her husband. Grant was off to the side talking with Uncle Ellis. Their heads were close together, their expressions sharp and private. I started toward the far wall, looking for a quiet corner. I had barely made it 3 steps when Grant raised his voice. "Let's just clear the air," he said, turning toward the center of the room. People looked up, confused, some still holding paper plates. He kept going. "There's been a lot of confusion today about family, about who belongs and who doesn't." I froze. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. He looked straight at me. "My father left behind a very clear will," he said, "and there's a reason she isn't mentioned. It's because she's not really his daughter." The room went completely silent. Dishes stopped clinking. A woman near the front gasped under her breath. I blinked, stunned. I opened my mouth to speak, but I couldn't find a single word. It was like the floor had dropped out beneath me. Then Uncle Ellis stepped forward and nodded. "Michael made things clear to us long ago. The estate goes to blood family. That was his wish." My hands started shaking. I felt heat rush to my face. I tried to speak, but I couldn't make my voice work. "I don't know what game you're playing," I finally said, my voice trembling, "but he raised me. I am his daughter." Grant crossed his arms. "You were taken in, raised, sure, but biologically, you're not one of us, you never were." He said it like he was giving a fact, like he was reciting a weather report. I looked around the room. Not one person spoke up for me. A few avoided my gaze. Others just watched with tight expressions, like this was a show and they were waiting for the next act. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt small, like I had shrunk inside myself. My throat burned, but I refused to cry. "Not here, not in front of them. How dare you," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "He loved me. You think a last name or DNA changes that?" Ellis shrugged. "We're just honoring what he put in writing." That was when I realized something wasn't right. My father was deliberate. He planned everything. The man carried 3 pens in his suit pocket in case one ran out. He never would have left me out of his will without saying something to me first. not unless he was forced to or manipulated. I stepped back. My pulse was racing. I could hear it in my ears. And just when I thought the moment couldn't get more surreal, a voice from the back of the room broke through. "Actually," the woman said, stepping forward with a calm authority that silenced everyone, "I worked with Michael for over 20 years. She was neatly dressed, professional, maybe in her 50s. I had never seen her before, but she moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you have nothing to hide. She looked directly at me and held up a small wooden box, smooth and polished, no bigger than a shoebox. He asked me to give this to Adira after he passed. He told me to wait until someone tried to take what was hers." Grant scoffed. "And who exactly are you?" The woman turned to him with a level gaze. "I'm someone he trusted more than either of you." She looked back at me and stepped forward. "He said you'd need this." My eyes locked on the box. My heart was thudding so hard it hurt. I didn't know what was inside. I didn't know why he hadn't just told me whatever it was while he was still alive. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. My father left something behind for me, and he knew this moment was coming. The box felt heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in meaning. Every pair of eyes in that room was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. Grant stood frozen, his smirk gone. Diane was across the room, pretending to look disinterested, but I saw the way her fingers tightened around her wine glass. Uncle Ellis looked like he wanted to say something, but even he stayed silent. The woman, Lena, she later introduced herself, held the box out with both hands. Her voice was steady when she said, "He told me to wait until this moment. He was very clear. He knew they might try to erase you." I took it from her slowly, my fingers brushing the grain of the wood. It was smooth, well-crafted, something my father would have appreciated. There was no lock, just a simple latch. I didn't move right away. Part of me didn't want to open it in front of them. I felt exposed, raw, like every part of me was on display and still being judged. But then I looked at Grant, standing there with his arms crossed like he'd already won. I looked at my uncle, a man who once gave me birthday cards without signing them, and I thought of my father, how tired he'd looked in the last few years, how distant, how distracted. Maybe this was why. Maybe carrying this secret was the weight that wore him down. I walked toward the table at the front of the room, set the box down, and opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope, thick with paper, and a USB flash drive tucked into the corner. On top was a folded note with my name written in his handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The same slant, the same sharp lines. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. "Adira, if you're reading this, it means they did exactly what I feared. I didn't want it to come to this. I wanted to protect you while I was alive. I thought I had more time. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want you to carry the weight of it all before you had to. You are my daughter in every way that matters, and also in the way they will try to deny." I felt the breath catch in my throat. My hands tightened around the paper. "Inside this envelope is your original birth certificate, not the one they tampered with after your mother died, the real one. I kept it hidden because I didn't trust them. You'll also find documents for a private trust I created years ago. Everything I couldn't protect publicly, I set aside for you in secret. It's yours, because you are mine." I looked up from the letter. For a moment, no one moved. Then I reached into the envelope and pulled out the birth certificate. It was aged but preserved. There, printed clearly under Father's name, was Michael Rains. My knees nearly buckled. I didn't speak. I just held it up. There were audible gasps. Someone in the back whispered something, and it spread like a ripple. Uncle Ellis took a step forward, his face hardening. "That could be forged," he said. Lena shook her head. "He gave it to me the day he updated his private will. He made sure it was witnessed and notarized. I have copies. You can challenge it if you want, but you'll lose." Grant looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Diane turned her back, her entire posture stiff. I turned to Lena. "The flash drive?" I asked. She nodded. "He said it was a message. For you." Someone handed me a laptop from the reception table. I plugged it in. The screen lit up and his face appeared. There was my father, sitting in his home office. He looked tired but peaceful. His eyes were full of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Clarity. Adira, he said, if you're seeing this, then I failed to protect you while I was alive, but I will not let them erase you. I know what they think. I know what they'll try to say, but I am your father, not just by blood, but by choice, by love, by every memory we shared. He paused. I didn't fight hard enough when they started pulling me away from you. I let guilt and fear silence me, but I never stopped being your dad. And everything that ever mattered to me, the drawings, the house, the trust I created in your name, it's all yours. I want you to have it, and I want you to stand tall because you are everything I ever hoped a daughter would be. The video ended. The silence in the room was deafening. That was the moment everything shifted. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I wasn't the forgotten child. I was his daughter, fully, completely, undeniably. No one spoke. The air in the reception room had changed. A moment ago, it had been thick with smugness and silent judgment. Now, it was heavy with disbelief. People who had been avoiding eye contact with me were suddenly leaning forward, trying to see the screen, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. I closed the laptop gently, my fingers lingering on the lid as if touching it kept my father close for 1 second longer. Lena stepped beside me, her face calm and certain. Michael didn't want his legacy controlled by people who twisted his intentions. He prepared everything legally. This isn't a loophole. It's his final word. Grant stepped forward. None of this changes the will. The official one was read last week. Lena looked at him without blinking. That was the public will. There's another one, private, held by his personal attorney, not the firm. It names Adira as the sole heir to his private estate. The room stirred again. Grant's confidence cracked. I saw it in his jaw, how he clenched it like a child, refusing to believe he was losing a game he thought was rigged in his favor. Uncle Ellis moved forward, sharp and deliberate. This is being blown out of proportion. We don't know what Michael was going through at the end. He was clearly confused, emotional. You can't seriously expect this to override a legal process. Lena didn't even flinch. I spoke with him every week until the day he died. His mind was clear. He was intentional. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew you would say that. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file. She handed it to me. Inside are signed documents, video testimony, and the legal transfer of the trust. He left it all to you, Adira. Not because of sentiment, because it was right. I opened the folder and saw the notarized trust documents, the dated legal letters from his personal lawyer, and a note addressed simply, "To the court, challenged." I didn't need the court's validation. I already had my father's, but still, I turned to face the room. To those of you who stood silent when they tried to erase me, I hope you're seeing now what silence costs, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. You watched them question my place at my own father's funeral. You watched them say I didn't belong, and no one said a word. No one interrupted. A few people lowered their eyes. One woman, someone I vaguely remembered from his office, wiped a tear and nodded. I don't want revenge. I don't want to fight. I just want what he intended me to have. What he built for me. What he preserved, even when he was afraid. Grant scoffed. You really think this changes anything? You can't fake blood. I turned to him. I don't need to fake anything. The truth is written in ink. It's written in the life he gave me, in every story I carry about him, in the plans we made together. You only want what he left behind. I carry who he was. That was when Diane finally spoke. She had been standing near the door the entire time, silent and detached, but now she turned, her voice cold and clipped. I told him this would happen, she said. I told him his guilt would come back to haunt him. He always let you take up too much space. I stepped forward. He gave me space because I was his daughter, because he loved me. You couldn't erase that, not with silence, not with lies. She walked out. Grant didn't follow. Uncle Ellis looked around, realizing he had lost whatever support he thought he had. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out after her. The room slowly returned to itself. People began whispering again, but this time, it wasn't about me being an outsider. It was about them. The ones who tried to keep this buried. The ones who underestimated what a father's love could protect. I stood in that room, holding the letter, the trust, the video, the proof that I belonged. Not because of documents or money, but because my father saw me. He knew what they would try to do, and he made sure I wouldn't be left defenseless. He didn't leave me behind. He left me everything. I went back to the house 2 days later, the one where I spent most of my childhood, the one with the creaky steps and the sunroom my father built by hand, board by board. The legal process was already underway, but Lena assured me it was just a formality now. The trust was airtight. My name was on everything that mattered. Still, I didn't walk in like someone who had won something. I walked in like someone returning home after years of being pushed out. I stepped through the front door and just stood in the entryway. The same smell was there, sawdust, lemon oil, and something softer I could never name but always recognized. I ran my hand along the wooden railing he carved with tiny marks from his old chisel set. Most people wouldn't notice them, but I did. I always had. This house was full of his fingerprints. I found the courage to go into his study last. It was exactly as he had left it. His blue drafting pencils were arranged in perfect rows. His favorite sketches were framed on the wall. There was a photo of me and him on his desk, one I hadn't seen in years. I was maybe 10. We were at the lake, and he had one arm around my shoulders and a grin that looked so alive it hurt to see. I sat in his chair and let myself cry for the first time since the funeral. Not because I was broken, but because I finally had space to grieve him without being questioned, without being watched like I didn't belong. That's when I realized what he had really given me. It wasn't money or land or trust documents. It wasn't even the birth certificate or the video. It was validation. It was the choice to protect me in a way he couldn't while he was alive. He knew he had stayed silent too long. He knew what Diane and Ellis were capable of. He saw how Grant dismissed me, tried to erase me, and he refused to let that be the final word. He gave me back my name. I spent the next few weeks going through his things. Lena helped me sort through the papers, and together we uncovered personal journals, handwritten letters, even old blueprints he had sketched just for fun. He left notes in the margins. Some were addressed to me. Others were clearly just his thoughts, little reminders to himself. Every page was a layer of the man I missed, the man I was still getting to know. I eventually found a small notebook labeled Adira's Adventures, tucked into a drawer beneath a stack of invoices. He hadn't written in it since I was in high school, but the last entry was a note. Trip to Italy. Just us. One day. We never made that trip, but now I carry that notebook with me everywhere. It reminds me that he never stopped planning a future with me in it. Lena stayed in my life. We still talk weekly. She's become a guide in a way I didn't know I needed, someone who saw my father clearly and never questioned my place beside him. She helped me set up the architecture scholarship in his name, one that gives young artists and designers a path he would have been proud of. As for Grant, Diane, and Uncle Ellis, I haven't heard from them since the court confirmed the trust. They never apologized. I didn't expect them to. They live in a world where power means more than connection. I've let that go. What I've learned is this: sometimes the people who love you the most don't always know how to protect you when it matters. But if they truly love you, they'll find a way to make it right. My father made mistakes. He let others control too much. But in the end, he found his voice. And with it, he gave mine back to me. This story isn't about a box or a will. It's about identity. About what it means to be seen and chosen, not just born. It's about a father who couldn't always say the right things, but who loved me enough to make sure the world couldn't silence me after he was gone. And that will always be enough. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt unseen, forgotten, or questioned in your own family, I hope you know this. Your truth matters. Your voice matters. And no one has the right to take that from you. Thank you for watching and for holding space for this story. If it moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts or hear your story too. And if you want more real stories that speak from the heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to come. You deserve to be seen, you deserve to be heard, and you are not alone. At my father's funeral, while everyone was quiet, heads bowed, my brother leaned over and whispered something that made my blood run cold. He left her nothing. he said, loud enough for a few people around us to hear. She never meant anything to him. I didn't react. I didn't even turn my head. I just stared straight ahead, my hands clenched in my lap. My stomach twisted, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I had come to say goodbye, to pay my last respects, even if my relationship with my father had been complicated, distant, mostly silent, sometimes painful. But I never expected cruelty from my own brother. Not today. Lance always knew how to twist the knife. He was my father's favorite, the golden son who could do no wrong. He inherited the business, the house, the trust. I inherited nothing but silence. After the service, the lawyer confirmed it. Everything had been left to Lance. Every last dollar. He sat there smug, pretending to mourn, but his eyes sparkled like he had won some prize. I stayed quiet. What was the point in arguing with the dead? But just as the lawyer began packing up his papers, a nurse I'd never seen before stepped forward. She looked nervous but determined, holding a small white envelope. She said, "Are you Amira Thorne?" I nodded. "He asked me to deliver this to you, and only you." And that's when everything changed. I hadn't seen my father in nearly 2 years before the funeral, not since our last conversation ended in silence. No yelling, no final blowout, just the quiet disappointment of two people who had never really understood each other. His name was David Thorne. To most people, he was a respected man, a sharp businessman, co-founder of a financial firm, a donor to 3 local charities, and the face of control and order. But to me, he was something else entirely, an absence. He was the man who raised me without ever really seeing me. My brother, Lance, was different. He was the image of my father in every way, confident, polished, goal-driven. He joined Dad's company right out of college, was promoted within a year, and started wearing suits that cost more than I made in a month. He knew how to speak Dad's language. Numbers, results, legacy. I didn't. I was the daughter who pursued writing, moved away from the city, and never came back for the family holidays. I became the stranger they spoke of in short, sharp phrases. When I was little, my father kept to himself. My mother, Elise, was the warmth in the house. She would sing while she folded laundry, kiss our foreheads even when we didn't want her to, leave little notes in our lunchboxes with smiley faces and short poems. When she died, I was 10. Lance was 13. Her funeral felt like the start of something we couldn't name, but felt every day after. The house got colder. My father became a man of strict routines and brief nods instead of hugs. Lance adapted. I didn't. As the years passed, I tried. I really did. I brought home stories I had written. I got scholarships, graduated early, submitted my first short story to a national contest. I remember handing it to him at dinner one night, excited, waiting for his reaction. He didn't even open it. He pushed it aside, asked me if I had considered a real job. That night, I stopped trying to prove anything to him. Our final conversation was 2 years ago. I'd called to tell him I was moving to Vermont to take a job teaching creative writing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I thought maybe this time he'd be proud, but all he said was, "So you're still running from responsibility?" I told him he didn't know who I was. He said, "Maybe I don't want to." And that was it. We never spoke again. So when I stood in the church, surrounded by people in dark suits and stiff expressions, I didn't know how to feel. Grief was there, yes, but it wasn't clean. It was mixed with resentment, guilt, confusion. I had lost something I never really had, and that was a strange kind of ache. Lance stood near the casket like he was hosting the event. He shook hands, gave short, rehearsed smiles, offered polite nods. When I arrived, he looked me over like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. I did. "That's brave, considering." "Considering what?" I asked. He didn't answer, just walked away like I had already lost some invisible contest I never agreed to play. During the service, I watched people cry. Some spoke about my father's generosity. One man said he mentored him for years and changed his life. Another called him a pillar of the community. I listened, wondering if we had known the same man. The will reading was scheduled right after the service. It was held in a side room at the funeral home. The lawyer, Mr. Carlyle, was professional, old school, with a briefcase that looked older than I was. He greeted us, opened a folder, and began reading. To my brother, everything. To me, Nothing. No explanation. No note. No acknowledgement. I expected disappointment, but somehow hearing it out loud still hit harder than I imagined. Like he had taken one last chance to erase me, and this time it would stick. Lance turned to me with that smirk I'd known since childhood, the one that said he had won again and I would never catch up. That's where I sat, number alone, watching him bask in victory. And then a woman I had never seen before, a nurse, stepped forward holding a white envelope in her hand. She said, "Are you Amira Thorne?" I said yes. She looked me straight in the eye. "Your father asked me to give this to you, and only you." The moment the nurse handed me the envelope, the air in the room shifted. Her name tag read Mallory, and her face was lined with kindness and something else, protectiveness, like she was guarding something important. She didn't glance at anyone else, not even Lance, who was standing only a few feet away. Her eyes stayed on me. "Your father was very clear," she said. "This is for you, no one else." Lance stepped forward, irritation breaking through his polite facade. "I'm sorry. Who are you again?" "I'm Nurse Mallory. I cared for your father during the last weeks of his life." Lance forced a polite smile. "Then I assume you're familiar with his will. Everything's been settled." Mallory didn't flinch. "He also left this. He gave it to me directly and said it was only to be opened by his daughter, Amira." Mr. Carlyle, the lawyer, raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't informed of any additional documents." Mallory opened her bag and pulled out a sealed white envelope. It was slightly worn at the corners. My name was written on the front in thick black ink, his handwriting. There was no mistaking it. I took it without saying a word. Lance scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Probably some sentimental nonsense. Doesn't change anything." I turned to him, calm on the outside but fighting to keep my voice steady. "Then why do you look nervous?" He didn't answer. I sat down and stared at the envelope. My fingers trembled, but I held it tightly. I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. There were too many eyes, too many agendas. For a moment, I just needed to breathe. The room was silent, tense, as if the will had been a performance, and now this envelope had interrupted the script. Lance paced. Mr. Carlyle looked uncomfortable. Even some of our distant relatives shifted in their chairs, unsure what to say. Mallory broke the silence. "Your father wasn't a perfect man," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "But in the last few weeks, he tried to make peace with that. He spoke about you often, Amira. Not about your failures, about your strength, about how he wished he'd seen you sooner." I blinked, unsure how to take that in. It didn't fit with the man I had known, the man who missed recitals, forgot birthdays, stayed late at work to avoid dinner conversations, and yet here she was, a stranger, telling me he had been thinking about me in his final days. Lance couldn't take it anymore. "Whatever's in that letter, it has no legal standing. The estate is already transferred." "I don't care about the estate," I said. "This isn't about money." But that wasn't entirely true. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about what it represented. Recognition. Inclusion. A sign that I mattered to the man who had always kept me at arm's length. Mr. Carlyle cleared his throat. "Technically, anything outside the will can't impact the division of assets. But if there's evidence of a final wish, especially from a medical witness, it could complicate matters." Lance turned on him. "You're a lawyer. You should know better than to entertain this." "I'm also an officer of the court," Carlyle replied coolly. "And if there's video or signed testimony, it's worth reviewing." Mallory reached into her bag again. "He asked me to record something. He couldn't physically sign a new document, but he wanted his words captured. He said, 'They'll believe it if they hear it from me.'" My heart pounded. I looked at the envelope again, still sealed in my hand. My father had never been a sentimental man, but maybe, near the end, he had changed. Maybe he had finally seen me, not as a burden or disappointment, but as his daughter, as someone worth reaching out to. "I want to open it alone," I said. Lance rolled his eyes. "Of course you do." "I'm not doing this for drama," I said. I need to know what he was trying to say, and I'm not going to let your bitterness ruin that. He didn't respond, just turned away, jaw clenched. As I walked out of the room with the envelope clutched in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not even hope. Clarity. Whatever was inside, it was meant for me, and no one could take that away. I stepped outside with the envelope pressed tightly in my hand. The funeral home's garden was quiet, tucked behind the building where no one followed. For the first time all day, I could breathe. I sat on a wooden bench near the fountain, my fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. The paper was soft, worn at the corners like it had been handled more than once. My name was written in my father's distinct handwriting. Sharp, angled, unchanging. For years I had told myself I didn't need anything from him. Not love, not approval, not answers. But I was wrong. I needed this. Not just the envelope. I needed to know that I wasn't invisible to him. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter, a brass key, and a small photograph. The photo was old. I recognized the moment instantly. I was 6 years old, sitting on my mother's lap, covered in paint. She was smiling, holding my hands, both of us stained with blue and green from one of our weekend art sessions. My father had taken that picture. I remembered now. He had leaned into the doorway, snapped it quickly, and disappeared again. The letter began simply. Amira, if you are reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to say what I needed to while I was alive. I failed in many ways, but my greatest failure was how I treated you. My hands shook. I blinked hard and kept reading. I told myself I was preparing you for the world, that keeping you at a distance would toughen you. I see now that I was just afraid. You reminded me too much of your mother. You were too bright, too passionate, too alive. I didn't know how to handle it, so I pushed you away. Lance fit into my world. You never did. But that was never your fault. That was mine. After the cancer diagnosis, I started writing letters, watching old tapes, reading your stories. I kept every single one, even the ones I told you didn't matter. I kept your first published piece in a drawer in my study. I've read it more times than I can count. I just didn't know how to tell you that I was proud. The key is to the cedar chest in my study closet. Inside are your mother's journals, her paintings, and my own attempts at apology. I wanted to change the will to reflect the truth, but I waited too long, and my health declined faster than I expected. Still, I asked Nurse Mallory to help me record my last wishes. I needed you to have this. Because the legacy I want to leave isn't money or property, it's truth. You were never a disappointment. You were the part of me I wish I had been brave enough to embrace. I'm sorry. I love you. Dad. I read it twice before I could breathe again. The words pressed into my chest like a weight and a release all at once. I had spent years building armor to protect myself from a father who never seemed to care. And now, here it was, unraveling in my hands. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't enough to erase the years of silence. But it was real. It was something. The brass key sat in my palm, warm from my grip. I knew exactly where it went. The cedar chest in his study had been locked for as long as I could remember. I had once asked about it when I was 13. He had told me it was just old files. I never asked again. I stood up and looked back at the funeral home, where Lance was likely still arguing with Mr. Carlyle, trying to maintain control. He had always been obsessed with control, with being the one who won. But this wasn't a game anymore. This was something he couldn't touch. I walked to my car, heart racing, not from fear, but from a strange, powerful pull. I wasn't sure what I would find inside that chest, but I knew it was meant for me. Whatever my father had hidden there, it would not be numbers or contracts. It would be pieces of him, pieces of her, pieces of me. This wasn't about reclaiming an inheritance. It was about reclaiming a history I had been shut out of, a voice I had long believed didn't exist. And now I was finally ready to hear it. I drove straight to the house, not to the cemetery, not to the reception. I had nothing left to say to Lance or anyone else circling like vultures around my father's estate. The Thorne house sat quiet at the top of its long driveway. It looked exactly the same as when I left it 10 years ago. Gray stone, white shutters, sharp corners that made it look more like a courthouse than a home. The porch creaked under my shoes as I unlocked the front door. Inside, the air was still. The furniture was untouched, staged for showings or inheritance photos, but I knew the way. My steps found the path to the study without thinking. His study had always been off limits. When we were kids, we weren't even allowed to peek inside. Even after I was grown, the door remained mostly shut. It had always felt like a vault built around his private life, his real one, the version he never shared. I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paper. His desk was neatly arranged. No dust, no disorder. Everything had its place. The walls were lined with books, degrees, a framed newspaper article from when he was named one of the top CEOs in the state. And there it was, the cedar chest. It sat beneath the window, exactly where I remembered. Unmoving, untouched, locked. Until now. I knelt beside it and slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a quiet click. The lid lifted easily. Inside were stacks of folders, canvas rolls, photo albums, and 3 leather-bound journals tied with faded red ribbon. The scent of old paper and dried paint filled the air. I reached for the journals first. My mother's name was written on the inside cover of each one, Elise Thorne. The handwriting was hers, fluid, bright, full of life. As I flipped through the pages, I saw poems she had written during her final year, drawings of me and Lance, letters she never sent. She wrote about her hopes for us, her fear of dying too young, and her longing for my father to show more warmth. She had left pieces of herself for us, and they had been hidden for more than 20 years. I was still holding her 3rd journal when I noticed the folder beneath it. It was labeled in my father's handwriting, for Amira. Inside were copies of every story I had ever sent him. The short story that won 2nd place in my college contest, the poem I had published in an online magazine, even the essay I had submitted for graduate school. He had printed them out, annotated them with notes in the margins, things like strong opening, vivid imagery, and one that simply said, "This one made me cry." I covered my mouth and sat back against the wall. This man, who I had believed never saw me, had read everything. And he hadn't just read it. He understood it. He had known me more than I realized, maybe more than I had allowed him to. I found a flash drive at the bottom of the chest, labeled Final Message. I plugged it into the laptop he had left behind. His face appeared on the screen, thinner than I remembered, eyes tired but focused. "Amira," he began, "I'm sorry I didn't say this sooner. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. But I needed to speak directly to you, because a letter didn't feel like enough." He paused for a breath. Then he said, "You were never a mistake. I was the one who failed to see you for who you were. I was so afraid of losing control that I pushed you away instead of pulling you in. Everything I hid in that chest was meant for you, not just the contents, the truth. The parts of your mother I buried, the parts of myself I was too ashamed to share. I don't care if the will says otherwise. That house is yours, that room is yours. Your mother wanted it that way, and now so do I." The video ended without fanfare, just silence and a still frame of a man who finally, in his last days, had faced what mattered. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not angry, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm has finally passed. He didn't leave me out. He just didn't know how to include me until it was too late, but he tried. And that effort, even delayed, meant more than I expected it could. For the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure. That's a myth. But something close. Something real. I stayed in the house that night. I didn't plan to. I had packed nothing, expected nothing. But after everything I had just seen, the idea of leaving felt wrong. I made a bed on the couch in the living room and let the weight of the day settle into my chest. It wasn't grief, exactly, or at least not the kind I had expected. It was more like something heavy unraveling inside me. In the morning, I walked back into the study and opened my mother's journals again. I read until the sun rose. Her voice came through every page with warmth and wit and fierce love. She had wanted us to grow up brave. She had worried about how we'd manage without her. She had asked my father, in one of her entries, to make sure Amira knows she matters. Maybe it had taken him too long. Maybe the damage had already been done. But he tried. In his own flawed way, he tried to honor that promise. 2 weeks later, I met with Mr. Carlyle again. I brought the letter, the flash drive, and Mallory's statement. He listened carefully, then nodded. "There's enough here to challenge the existing will," he said, "especially with the video. And since the house hasn't officially transferred to your brother, we can file a claim." Lance wasn't happy. He sent a short message through his attorney, accusing me of exploiting sentiment and undermining our father's wishes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for itself. The legal process took time, but in the end, I kept the house. I didn't want the money. I let Lance have it. Let him keep the company, the accounts, the control. He could stay in his world of profit margins and prestige. I had something better, something he never noticed was missing. The legacy my father left me wasn't measured in dollar signs. It was measured in understanding, in regret, in effort, and in that small, simple word he had never said before, love. I turned the study into a writing room, not just for me, but for others. I opened it twice a week as a creative space for young writers who had no place to go. We read my mother's stories. We painted. We laughed. We wrote things that felt too honest and too raw for classrooms or workshops. It became something real, something alive. One day, I found a folder hidden in the bottom of the chest I had somehow missed. It was filled with letters my father had written but never sent. Some were addressed to me. Others were notes to himself. They weren't polished or even coherent in places, but they were honest. And they showed a man who had spent the last months of his life trying to understand who he had been and who he had hurt. That was the thing I never expected. Not just the apology, but the effort behind it. He could have died with the same silence he lived in. But he didn't. He asked a nurse to deliver something no lawyer could. He chose words over wealth, meaning over inheritance. That choice rewrote the end of our story. Months later, I published a book, a hybrid memoir. Half my writing, half my mother's journals and artwork. At the center was my father's letter. I titled it The Chest Under the Window, A Daughter's Inheritance. It didn't hit bestseller lists, it didn't make headlines, but it found readers. One day at a book event, a teenage girl walked up to me, clutching her copy like it was something fragile. She asked, "Did your dad ever read your stories while you were still writing them?" I paused for a moment before answering. Then I said, "He did. Just not when I needed him to." She nodded like she understood something I hadn't expected her to. That was the truth of it. Some people find their way back too late to change the past, but not too late to leave something meaningful behind. My father didn't raise me with words, but in the end, he left me his. And in choosing to open that envelope, I finally opened the part of my life I thought had been sealed forever. And maybe that's what matters most. Not how a story starts, or even how it falls apart, but how we choose to carry the truth forward once we finally have it in our hands. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of someone you've loved or lost, please take a second to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I read everyone, and your stories matter too. And if you want more real stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for being here.